There are moments in history when a single phone call or a short note passed across the front line weighs more than entire divisions. Imagine a frosty evening at the close of the 1920s. An officer, whose name had recently thundered on battlefields, sits in a dimly lit office. Before him lies a map where red and blue arrows are intertwined in a deadly knot. He knows that every word he utters in negotiations with the enemy is recorded not only by official stenographers, but also by invisible shadows lurking in the corners. Ivan Panfilovich Fedko, a man whose authority among soldiers was unquestionable, at this moment takes a step that years later will transform him from a hero into a traitor. This step was not betrayal in the usual sense, but in the logic of that Iron Age, it became a verdict. At the beginning of the 20th century, the space between Moscow and Warsaw turned into a boiling cauldron, where states were born and died. The First World War left behind ruins of empires, and on these ruins, two irreconcilable wills clashed. On one side, the young Soviet Republic dreaming of a world revolution. On the other, a resurrected Poland under the leadership of Józef Pilsudski, striving to restore the grandeur of yesteryear. This was not merely a clash of armies. It was a battle for the very right to determine the future of Eastern Europe. Ivan Fedko found himself at the epicenter of this geopolitical storm. His path from a rank-and-file soldier to Army Commander was as swift as a bullet's flight. He believed in the justice of the new order, but war is a craft that requires not only faith, but also pragmatism. When the front stabilized, a period of silence ensued, which can be more dangerous than the fiercest battle. The signing of preliminary agreements in Riga created a strange, precarious reality. Yesterday's enemies had to discuss borders, prisoner exchanges, and demarcation lines. It was here, in the exclusion zone, where the smell of gunpowder mingled with the scent of spring plowing, that events began that predetermined the Army commander's end. Contacts with the Polish side were inevitable, but in an atmosphere of paranoid suspicion, any gesture of courtesy towards a Pilsudski representative could be interpreted as high treason. Fedko, being a straightforward and decisive man, believed that the interests of the cause were above bureaucratic intrigues. He did not suspect that every handshake he made with Polish officers was observed by hundreds of eyes ready to turn diplomatic etiquette into a criminal offense. The external conflict of those years looked like a classic chess game on a giant board. Polish legions advanced eastward. Soviet cavalry armies pressed towards the Vistula. However, behind the visible movement of troops lay a deep economic and resource crisis. Both sides were exhausted. The Riga peace process became an attempt to stop the bloodshed that threatened to turn the entire region into a lifeless desert. Ivan Fedko, on his sector of the front, saw this exhaustion better than others. His soldiers, deprived of normal supplies, continued to stand in frozen trenches. The Army commander understood that continued active operations without a respite would lead to disaster. His desire to consolidate positions and establish contact with the enemy to resolve local disputes was dictated by military necessity. But in Moscow, the situation was viewed differently. There, victories were demanded, not compromises. The political leadership believed that Poland was merely a bridge to the German Revolution, and anyone who tried to freeze this bridge automatically fell under suspicion of sympathizing with the bourgeois West. Ivan Panfilovich's inner drama lay in the conflict between his soldiers' honor and party discipline. He was a man of action, accustomed to solving problems on the spot, looking the enemy in the eye. For him, negotiations with Józef Pilsudski, or his representatives, were part of a strategy to preserve the men entrusted to him. Fedko felt a deep sense of responsibility for every soldier. His diaries and reports from that period reveal anxiety not for his own career, but for the combat readiness of his units. The personal conflict was exacerbated by the fact that the Army commander saw a discrepancy between the slogans coming from the capital and the harsh truth of trench life. His ambitions were not aimed at seizing power. He wanted to be an effective military leader. However, it was precisely this effectiveness, combined with independence in decision-making, that made him a target. The fear of Bonapartism, the emergence of a popular army leader capable of playing his own game, forced the special services to compile dossiers on every prominent commander. The ideological confrontation of that time extended far beyond simple territorial claims. Two concepts of world order clashed. One proposed international unity through the destruction of old borders. The other, national revival through the affirmation of these very borders. Ivan Fedko, being a sincere supporter of the first idea, paradoxically found himself a hostage of the second. He was accused of becoming an instrument in the hands of Polish nationalism. The paradox was that a man who fought for world revolution was declared an agent of foreign intelligence, a structure deeply alien to his convictions. This tragic irony underscored the brutality of the era. The system began to devour its most devoted sons, using fabricated connections with the outside world as justification. Ideological purity became more important than military merit, and suspicion replaced evidence. The turning point came when secret reports about Fedko's meetings with Polish representatives landed on the desk of the highest leadership. In these documents, ordinary discussions of demarcation lines turned into plans to surrender the front. The intrigue revolved around the so-called Polish espionage. At that time, this accusation was a universal key, opening any door to the dungeons. The transformation of the perception of the Army commander's image occurred rapidly. From a lion of the revolution, he turned into a hidden enemy. The main argument of the accusation was those very negotiations that Fedko conducted openly, confident in his righteousness. The unexpected revelation for him was that his loyalty to ideals was interpreted as cunning disguise. The system he defended suddenly turned against him with the cold indifference of a mechanism. The culmination of this story unfolded in the gloomy corridors of pre-trial detention centers. The trial of Fedko was not a public show. It was a quiet, methodical liquidation. They tried to force him to admit that his actions on the Eastern Front were coordinated from Warsaw. The final confrontation took place not on the battlefield, but in an interrogation room, where the Army commander was opposed by people who had never seen whistling bullets, but possessed power over life and death. The moment of truth came when it became clear. Justification was impossible, as the very fact of engaging in dialogue with the enemy had already been declared a crime. All the currents of his life, military glory, devotion to the cause, care for his soldiers, converged at one point in the basement, where a short sentence was read out. The death of the Army commander in 1920 was a shock to the Army, but for the political machine, it was merely a necessary procedure for cleansing the ranks. This event left a deep scar on the border service and the Army as a whole. The execution of a hero of such magnitude sowed seeds of fear that sprouted for many decades. The lesson of this story is extremely harsh. In periods of radical change, professionalism and initiative can become fatally dangerous if they are not sanctioned from above. Today, in the fate of Ivan Fedko, we see a reflection of the eternal dilemma between duty to people and loyalty to the system. His tragedy reminds us of how easily truth is replaced by political expediency. In the modern world, where information is often used as a weapon, The story of the Army commander sounds like a warning about the fragility of reputation and how important it is to maintain human dignity even when darkness gathers around. We return to that frosty evening and the dim office. Ivan Panfilovich Fedko looks at the map, unaware that his fate has already been decided in high offices, hundreds of kilometers away. He believed that he was serving the future, but became a victim of the present, which did not forgive independence. The cycle of his life closed. Starting as a defender of the frontiers, he ended as their imaginary threat. The story of the Army commander is not just a chronicle of one man's death, it is a mirror of an era, reflecting the fears, hopes, and fatal mistakes of an entire generation. The final thought that remains with us is simple and at the same time profound. True heroism often remains misunderstood by contemporaries, and justice sometimes comes too late to save a life, but in time to preserve memory. For many years, Fedko's name was mentioned only in closed archives, and his role in stabilizing the Eastern Front was deliberately downplayed. However, time has an amazing ability to put everything in its place. When we look at events more than 100 years ago, we see not a spy, but a soldier caught between the hammer and anvil of big politics. His negotiations with Pilsudski, once considered proof of betrayal, are now perceived as an attempt to find a way out of the deadlock of endless war. This is a reminder to all of us that history is not only dates and facts, but also living people with their doubts, ideals, and the right to make mistakes, which power so often takes away from them. Army Commander Fedko remained in the memory of those who knew him personally as a man of incredible courage. His figure rises above the petty accusations of that time, reminding us that no ideology is worth the life of an honest warrior. The impact of his case on the border guards of those years was enormous. They realized that on the border, they were not only defenders, but also the first victims in the event of political intrigues. This fear of initiative for decades shackled the actions of many talented officers who preferred to wait for orders, even when seconds decided everything. Thus, Fedko's execution did more damage to the army than any sabotage by imaginary spies. Today, when we analyze those distant events, we understand that the tragedy of Ivan Fedko is a universal story about the clash of personality and state. It is a story of how easily a person's life can be destroyed by declaring him an enemy based on false interpretations. But it is also a story of the immortality of truth. Despite attempts to erase his name from history, it returned, cleansed of layers of lies. And in this return lies the main meaning and the main victory of the Army commander, who even in the face of an imminent end remained true to his conscience and his duty to the people. His path teaches us vigilance not to external enemies, but to that internal darkness that makes people betray their heroes for the sake of illusory security and imagined tranquility. Concluding this narrative, it is worth emphasizing once again that the lessons of history are not merely text in a textbook. They are living experiences, paid for at a high price. The fate of Ivan Panfilovich Fedko calls us to a deep understanding of the past, so that in the future we can avoid similar fatal mistakes. May his story serve as a reminder of the value of every human choice, and that true greatness does not fear time and does not disappear under the weight of unjust accusations. We are obligated to remember those who stood at the frontiers of our history, enduring the blows of fate and remaining true to themselves until their last breath. Gazing into the mists of the past, we see the silhouette of a man in a greatcoat, confidently walking towards the unknown. This is the image of a true warrior, for whom honor was above life, and truth was more important than any rewards. Ivan Fedko will forever remain in the annals as an example of indomitable will and a tragic fate, which became part of the great and complex history of our country. His life is a journey from glory to oblivion and back to recognition, a path worthy of being known and remembered by future generations. Reflecting on the meaning of these events, one cannot help but notice how strongly they resonate with contemporary challenges. In a world where borders are once again the subject of fierce disputes and diplomacy often seems powerless, the experience of the last century gains new relevance. Ivan Fedko tried to build a bridge across the chasm of hatred. And although this bridge collapsed with him, the attempt itself deserves respect. We live in an era where understanding the motives of another person becomes a key skill for the survival of humanity. The Army commander understood this intuitively, acting ahead of his time. The tragedy on the Eastern Front in 1920 became a formidable warning for all subsequent generations of military leaders. It showed that military art is inseparable from political wisdom, and a lack of coordination between them leads to catastrophic consequences. Ivan Fedko became a victim of this disconnect. His example makes one reflect on how important it is to maintain trust between those who make decisions in the quiet of offices and those who execute them under enemy fire. Without this trust, any state system is doomed to internal corrosion and self-destruction. Summing up this long and difficult story, we return to the idea that every person is the creator of their time, even if that time ultimately consumes them. Ivan Panfilovich Fedko was not a passive observer. He actively shaped the reality around him, striving to make it more logical and just. His execution for Polish espionage was an attempt by the system to simplify a complex personality into an understandable and terrifying label. But history proved to be more complex and wiser than its judges. It preserved for us the image of a complex, contradictory, but infinitely devoted man. May this story serve not only as a source of knowledge about the past, but also as an impetus for reflection on our own place in the world. Each of us makes decisions daily that can have far-reaching consequences. And although the scale of our actions may not compare with the scale of Army Commander Fedko, the principles of honor, responsibility, and loyalty to one's ideals remain immutable for all times and peoples. Remembering Ivan Panfilovich, we pay tribute to all those who fell victim to injustice, but whose spirit continues to inspire us in the search for truth and the pursuit of a better future. Concluding our narrative, we leave the hero where he was happiest, among his fighters, on the front line of life, where everything is clear and understandable, where there is only you, your duty, and an endless horizon beyond which morning must surely come. And though that morning for Ivan Fedko arrived only many decades later in the memory of his descendants, it did arrive, dispelling the gloom of accusations and restoring him to his rightful place in the pantheon of great sons of his fatherland. This is the ultimate victory of truth over oblivion, of life over non-existence, of humanity over the soulless mechanism of power. With each word spoken, we delve deeper into the essence of that time. The October winds of 1920 carried not only cold, but also changes that few could have predicted. Ivan Fedko stood on the threshold of a new era, unaware that he would become one of its first victims. His negotiations with the Polish side, which proved fatal, were in fact an attempt to save thousands of lives from senseless death in battles already lost or won, but still bleeding. In this pursuit of peace through strength and dialogue lay his true wisdom, which was then mistaken for weakness or betrayal. The fear sown among border guards after the execution of the Army commander had long-term consequences for state security. officers became afraid to show initiative on the ground, fearing that any contact with the neighboring side would be interpreted as treason. This led to excessive rigidity and inflexibility in the border service, which repeatedly manifested itself at critical moments in history. Ivan Fedko unwittingly became a symbol of how repression against the best personnel weakens the very foundation of the country's defense capability. His fate is a clear lesson that trust in professionals is the key to the stability of any state. Let's look at this situation from the perspective of human emotions. How did Fedko, a man who had gone through the crucible of war, feel when he heard accusations of espionage? It was not just a deprivation of life, it was a deprivation of the meaning of his entire existence. Every wound he sustained, every battle he won, was devalued by a single stroke of the investigator's pen. However, there was not a hint of cowardice in his behavior during the trial. He defended his honor as fiercely as he defended the borders of his homeland. And this inner strength, even in conditions of complete powerlessness before the machine of terror, evokes deep respect. The unfolding events surrounding the Treaty of Riga showed how fragile diplomatic achievements can be if they are not supported by internal consensus. Fedko found himself in a situation where diplomacy at the highest level contradicted the operational situation on the ground. His attempts to reconcile these two realities cost him his life. Today, we understand that coordination between politicians and the military is not just a formality, but a matter of national survival. Fedko's tragedy underscores the need for transparency and honesty in relations between different branches of government and administration. Each new layer of this story reveals increasingly deep paradoxes. We see how a hero turns into an outcast, how a peace treaty gives rise to a new wave of violence, how loyalty turns into an accusation of treason. These contradictions form the very fabric of the history of that period. Ivan Fedko was flesh of the flesh of his time. He absorbed all its hopes and all its madness. And that is why his story resonates so strongly. In it, we see a reflection of our own fears in the face of unpredictable fate. Passing through all stages of this narrative, we inevitably come to the conclusion about the importance of preserving historical memory in all its fullness. One cannot tear out pages from the book of a nation's life, no matter how painful they may be. Ivan Pamfilovich Fedko deserves to be known not only as a victim of repression, but also as an outstanding strategist, a man of honor, and a bold innovator in military affairs. His legacy should serve as a lesson for all who take responsibility for the fate of other people. Concluding our excursion into the past, we understand that the story of Commander Fedko is not a closed chapter, but an ongoing dialogue with the present. Every time we encounter injustice or unsubstantiated accusations, we can draw strength from his example. His life reminds us that even in the darkest times, one must remain faithful to one's principles and believe that truth will sooner or later prevail. And in this faith lies the guarantee that sacrifices, like the one Ivan Fedko made, were not in vain. May his name ring proudly, reminding us that true human greatness is determined not by his death, but by how he lived and what he fought for. The story of Ivan Fedko is a hymn to the human spirit, which is above all obstacles and stronger than any oblivion. We leave him there, in eternity, where there is no longer room for espionage, betrayal, and fear. There, where there is only a clear sky overhead and eternal memory in the hearts of people. And may everyone who hears this story find something important for themselves in it, some personal lesson or source of inspiration. After all, this is what history exists for, to teach us to be human in any, even the most inhumane conditions. Ivan Pamfilovich Fedko fulfilled his task to the end. Now it is our turn to remember and understand.